Disclaimer. This podcast is AI-powered and all data and sources are from podwires.com. They have been fact-checked and vetted by a human editor.
From the Podwires newsroom at podwires.com.
Hey everyone, it seems like AI is everywhere these days, right? AI-generated music, AI art, and now it's popping up in the world of audio and podcasting too. You've clearly been diving into this world yourself because you sent over a really interesting mix of articles, award announcements, and even some market research. It seems like you're really interested in not just the tech itself, but how people are using it and what it all means for the future of audio.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting is the range of sources you've gathered. You want the complete picture, huh? From the tech itself to how it affects real creators and listeners.
Exactly. And speaking of seeing AI in action, you sent over this article from ABC about their experiment using AI to generate podcast titles and descriptions. What were your initial thoughts on this experiment?
Well, it's interesting because it highlights something we're seeing a lot right now with AI and audio production. The goal isn't to replace us, the human creator.
Oh, so it's not about the robots taking over.
Not quite. It's more about using AI to support and enhance the work we're already doing. It's about exploring how AI can assist in the creative process, not take over completely.
Okay, so how did it actually work? Did they just feed an algorithm a bunch of episode notes and say, go?
Well, not exactly. They use something called prompt engineering, which might sound kind of boring, but it's actually pretty cool. They essentially gave the AI really detailed instructions, almost like guidelines, to shape the output.
So it's not some magical AI just doing whatever it wants. There's still a human touch involved in guiding the process. So what were the results like? Was ABC blown away by what the AI came up with?
It was a mixed bag for sure. There were times when the AI came up with some really strong titles, even more concise and catchy than the human written ones, believe it or not.
Oh, wow. So Team AI had some clear wins.
Definitely. For example, for a sports podcast, the AI suggested a title that really focused on a particular player's journey and overall impact. The human-written title for that same episode focused more on the player's background.
I see. So both good, but the AI just got straight to the point.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean the AI was perfect.
Yep.
There were definitely some misses as well.
Like what?
Well, sometimes it would generate titles that were way too generic. And this one made me laugh. It developed this strange thing for colons.
Colons? You mean the punctuation?
Yes. It kept trying to put them in the titles, even when they didn't make grammatical sense. It just goes to show, I guess, that AI, at least in its current state, can sometimes miss those subtle nuances of human language and creativity.
That's a good point. AI can be a really powerful tool, but it can't replace human creativity entirely. But for us podcast creators, though, this technology seems like it could be really useful, right?
Absolutely. Just imagine.
Yeah.
You could have an AI assistant helping you come up with titles, writing descriptions, even suggesting relevant topics based on what's trending at the moment.
That would free up so much time and energy to focus on actually making the episodes amazing.
Exactly. Crafting compelling narratives, making sure the audio is top-notch, connecting with listeners, all of that is still so important.
It'd be like having a brainstorming partner who's always coming up with new ideas, even if they're not all winners. But let's move on from the tech itself for a minute. In your research, you mentioned the Australian Commercial Radio and Audio Awards, the ACRAs. To be honest, I'm not too familiar with those.
They're a pretty big deal in the Australian audio industry. They give awards for everything from radio broadcasting to podcasting. They're like the Oscars for audio down under.
Got it. And you mentioned that a podcast called Hannah Story won the award for Podcast of the Year, which is interesting because it's a true crime podcast, and that genre seems to be everywhere right now.
It really does. True crime has become super popular in the podcasting world, and Hannah's Story is a great example of that. And it's not just a fluke. The data backs it up.
Oh, yeah. What kind of data are we talking about?
Well, there was the Australian Podcast Biannual Report. It showed an almost 9% jump in monthly podcast listeners this year alone, a big chunk of that being true crime.
Wow, 9% is huge. Makes you wonder what it is about true crime that really grabs people. We should circle back to that later. But it's interesting, the success of that podcast, Hannah's Story, it's not just an Australian thing.
That's right. The podcasting world is growing and changing all the time. We're seeing more and more high-quality audio coming from all over the place, gaining international recognition. It all comes down to a good story no matter where it comes from.
That's a good point. Good storytelling is universal. But this actually brings up something I know some listeners worry about. With all this talk about AI and its potential in audio, is there a risk of losing that human touch?
It's a valid concern for sure. I mean, when we think about what makes audio so powerful, the creativity, the empathy, the nuance, it's only natural to wonder if AI can really capture that.
Can an algorithm really understand what makes us tick, What resonates with us on that deeper level?
It's something a lot of people are thinking about.
Yeah.
But here's the thing to remember. AI and audio, it's not about replacing that human connection we're talking about. If anything, it's about making it even stronger.
So instead of robots taking over, it's more like giving creators new tools to connect with their audience.
Exactly. These tools can help us do things like streamline tasks, analyze data, even experiment with new creative formats.
But at the end of the day, it's still about that human experience.
Absolutely. And on that note, listeners are more discerning than ever. Authenticity, genuine passion, those are the things that really matter. People can spot a generic, soulless production right away.
And speaking of connecting with listeners, you had this stat in your research. 50% of podcast listeners actually feel more connected to brands that have a strong sonic identity. What does that even mean? Sonic identity. Sounds kind of vague.
It's all about crafting a sound that's consistent and recognizable. Think about that Netflix Toodum sound.
Yeah, you hear that and you know exactly what it is.
Exactly. Or certain podcasts, they just have this really distinctive sound. Maybe it's a combination of music and sound effects, the host's voice, but you hear it and you know right away who it is.
It's true. It's like a certain song can take you back to a specific memory. A podcast sound can do the same thing.
Right. It creates a whole atmosphere, an immersive experience. And the award-winning podcasts we talked about, they do this really well. That sound is such a powerful tool for telling a story. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it.
And that makes me think about all the different ways people are listening to audio these days. It's not just dedicated podcast fans anymore, right? You mentioned that even baby boomers are getting into digital audio more and more.
It's kind of surprising, but it's definitely happening. You might not think of baby boomers as the biggest digital audio consumers, but they're actually the fastest growing group.
Wow, I would not have guessed that.
It really challenges what we think we know about who's listening. And it just shows how digital audio is becoming more and more a part of our everyday lives, no matter how old we are.
It really highlights how much the audio landscape is changing. AI tools that can help us unlock all this creative potential, more people listening than ever. It really feels like things are getting really interesting in the audio world.
They are. And as AI continues to evolve, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. It's going to bring so much opportunity, but also some really important questions. How can we use these tools responsibly? How do we make sure that human connection stays at the heart of it all, even as the technology changes?
It's a lot to think about, but that's what this show is all about. So thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through all of this. I feel like we're just scratching the surface of what's possible with AI and audio, but this was definitely a great place to start. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
This episode is brought to you by Podwire's Marketplace, the best platform for finding top podcast service providers and podcast producers. We've selected the best, and we're ready to make your project ideas a reality, no matter the size. We will achieve your business goals together. Find podcast experts who understand your market and will help you grow your business. Learn more right now on the homepage, https://marketplace.podwires.com.